When I originally got into like retro games, I don't know, at this point, like 20, 30 years ago now. Yeah, probably. Um, I guess in no way did I ever think that it was like a space that would ever like change and evolve. But that is definitely the thing that's happened. I think especially over the last like 10 to 15 years or so, there's been a ton of developments in how you can play retro games, right? And also, using either the original hardware or through emulators, either software or hardware emulation. Like, it is a space that is, in a lot of weird ways, is constantly changing, despite primarily being used to play games that were released back when they came out, put on a shelf, and then just exist today as they did, however many years ago at this point, right? And I think that's like really cool, but at the same time, there's like this weird barrier that kind of gets in the way for some people, including myself sometimes, where like I want to play something in a way that feels more faithful to that original approach, right? And exactly what that means to people, I think, is like very different across the board. Recently, though, I was talking to Mr. Jakes from Basement Brothers, and I think the one thing that was like really surprising to me was like, I was like, "Hey, you want to talk about something?" He's like, "Yeah, I want to talk about how CRTs are overrated." This is a man who like is covering PC98, and when you watch his videos, he is a physical PC98 beside his in a lot of his pictures, right? He's playing on original hardware. So I thought it was fascinating, this idea that like he would say, but CRTs, don't worry about it, kind of thing. So I want to talk to him a little bit today about kind of his relationship with physical games and original hardware, and kind of as a whole, and also with the focus on being kind of like, what is the difference between playing on like a CRT versus an LCD, and like what are the benefits, and like depending on what platform you're using and things like that. And then also just trying to get at the core of exactly like, why we chase some of these things, and like what's important about these kind of old technologies that make us want to see them play in very specific ways, whether it matters or not. I was a little surprised, though, that you brought up wanting to say CRTs were overrated. Um, because when I've watched your videos, I know you have an LCD screen on screen. Um, but I usually see like a PC98 in there, right? It's like there's the physical hardware is there and everything. And I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, on your channel, you are playing those games on the original hardware. You're capturing from the original hardware, right?
Always
Always.
using the original hardware. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I think part of the reason why I thought this would be kind of interesting when you mentioned this is because, like, I think I've been rethinking my relationship with original hardware a lot more recently. Where I originally built up a big original hardware collection because at the time, getting things to work that weren't like 16-bit or something like that um, was hard or was not ideal. But now I feel like the things have changed a lot. Um, so I kind of just wanted to get like a general idea of, well, first and foremost, about like your relationship with video games as a physical product, right? Because I think I assume you're aware of this, but I feel like there's a very physical nature of video games that people tend to care about a lot. I mean, that's why companies like Limited Run Games exist, right? Because people want this physical relationship with games. So I'm curious, like, what would you say is like when you think about your relationship with physical games, like where does that feel like it starts for you?
Huh. Well, where to start? That's exactly the question. It's a broad topic.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I would have to just say goes back in for the history for me because that's how I started. When I
Yeah.
started gaming, that was all there was. There wasn't any other option. You had the consoles. Emulators were still brand new, really, and they were only for PCs. And we, I would always, I had been accumulating games, physical games, since the beginning, just because it just
Mhm.
felt like second nature to me. And so I think it's just kind of something I've continued to do just since my childhood and early adulthood, and just I don't know.
When
And
you were a kid, like, and sorry, I forget if we ever covered this on the PCFX fan club podcast, but like, what were the consoles you were kind of like playing at that time, kind of thing?
well, I started out in the NES days. So the NES was
Mhm.
the first system for me and my brothers, and then later on, um, we we got a Genesis next, or a Master. We got a Sega Master System actually too.
Mm-hmm.
Before it was mostly my other brother's system. Kind of, we kind of like tried to. We shared stuff and then we kind of separated, because we're kids. We kind of had that thing where like this is mine, don't touch my stuff kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
We
yeah.
ownership, possessive ownership kind of thing. So but in reality, we would always end up playing each other's games and stuff. So it
Mhm.
was, I mean, it was mostly a shared experience. But okay, so one of my brothers gets the Master System, and then later on we got a Genesis when that
Was
came
the NES
out when it was brand new.
yours, or was that like
I was me and my It was mostly me and my brother
okay,
Neo Alec were sharing the Nintendo stuff at first.
gotcha.
Like and we got the Super NES and or the Game Boy before that and the Super NES and um and at one point suddenly we all kind of broke off and we like in the 16-bit era, I actually have three brothers. It's four of us, but for basement brother purposes, we have one brother who's not really a gamer. So for
Mhm.
basement brothers, it's just the three of us. Um, and at one point in 16-bit era, um, we decide finally, like my brother Neo Alec is now the Sega guy, and my brother Stu Rat is now the Nintendo guy. And what's left, I ended up being the TurboGrafx guy. Just and that sounded like none of us had owned a TurboGrafx before. We had rented one actually at
Mhm.
one point, and that was like our only experience with it. It just seemed like an interesting new world it would be. So eventually, once I became the TurboGrafx guy, then I became the weird one who had to get eventually with TurboGrafx he had to get into import games and all of that, and so eventually I guess that's how I became the one who started learning Japanese and eventually ended up living in Japan. But I just kept searching for the most rare, more
Mhm.
more the kind of stuff that nobody else played and the systems that nobody knew about in the US, like the PCFX. and and eventually like I ended up going with getting really into the PC 98 in the early 2000s because that was like kind of the frontier, the thing that
Mhm.
existed in Japan that nobody knew about in the West. So
When you're looking at the PC-98 back then, like, was that something you were seeing through magazines and things like that, or is that something that you were
it
hearing
wasn't even
from
in
people?
magazines.
Yeah,
It wasn't like most people didn't know about it. I think I explained on the PCFX podcast that there was I was on this Turbo Graphics mailing list it was called the Turbo list usually,
that's
and that
right,
was kind of
yeah.
in the 90s. That was kind of the late 90s. That was kind of our main outlet for like other NEC and PC Engine,
Mhm.
PCFX to some extent. It was the main outlet for the main online community for the NEC systems. And since NEC also was a big PC company in Japan with the PC 98, it would get mentioned like occasionally by people who were in the know because there were people on the Turbo mailing list who lived in Japan too at the time
Mhm.
who would like sell us all their PC Engine games. And they would go and pick up PC Engine games on the used market and then resell them to us outside Japan. Because at the time I didn't live in Japan yet in the late 90s. I moved to Japan in 2001. But yeah, that wasn't about all I heard about PC 98. The other thing I mentioned on my video on the PC 98 game, The Legend of Heroes 3, The White Witch. There was a promotional video I got a copy of for a
Mhm.
Falcom promotional video I had in the 90s that had a commercial on it. It had commercials for a bunch of Falcom games, but it had one commercial for Legend of Heroes 3 for PC 98 that I saw on there. I was like, whoa, what's
Oh,
this kind of
interesting.
thing? And
Yeah.
so I just couldn't stop thinking about it for some reason. Like that was weird. Like the game looked pretty crappy actually, I thought, in the video, but at the same time it was like, but this is like, what is this? It sounds like FM sound, like the
Yeah.
Sega Genesis, and the graphics are all bumpy, the scrolling looks all bumpy, and it's like, this is weird. Who plays this? Everything, why does this exist? Like I've never heard of this before.
I think
and
the
and
phrase that
so
came to mind was "distinctly crappy" is, like, how old PC games look sometimes, like, they
and the
look
game wasn't
bad,
even that
but in a
old at the
way that
time.
looks like a PC
Yeah,
game, if that makes
that game
sense.
came out in what, 94, 95, 94 or 95, 94, I think, and
Yeah.
it wasn't even that old at the I think I was watching this in, like, 1996 or 97 or something, and it was like, "This
Mhm.
game isn't even that old, but it looks really old," and at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's like, it's weird. It was weird. I was like, "It's so weird. I wonder what that's all about," this kind of
I
thing.
I
Like, I
wonder
don't
if it was because it was designed. I mean, you can probably know better than me, but, like, designed around the idea of, like, the Japanese PC market is more of, like, business PC kinda stuff, right? And so you're not necessarily pushing these systems hard. You'd rather make a game that would install on more systems versus one that is
yeah.
really good. I could be wrong about that, but that'd be
That's
my
that's kind
general
of the general
sentiment.
idea. The
Yeah.
the thing is with the PC-98 is that it was really grandfathered in. Like, this PC series started in, like, 1982. It was, like, really early '80s, the PC-98
Mhm.
actually started, and it was modestly popular. Like, it got more popular in the late '90s until in or the late '80s. It got more popular in the late '80s, and then finally in the '90s, somehow it became the most popular PC series in Japan that everybody used for just business or even home computing or gaming. It was just the main PC that people had. But
Yeah.
so it had a lot of things that were grandfathered in though about it. Like the system resolution was still like only 640 by 400, which is I guess at the time it was 640 by 480 usually
Yeah.
in the West anyway, so it wasn't too different, but it had a lot of limitations, especially the games. They would try to make them for DOS at first instead of requiring Windows in the early '90s, and
Mhm.
with that, you have you know extended memory and the main memory to work with. And once you start getting into a lot of extended memory, then you start um, not only discluding people who have less memory on their system, but even discluding people who can't figure out how to get the extended memory working and stuff
Yeah.
in order to start the game. So, especially like Falcom was one company, they would try to use like the minimal specs, like for almost
Yeah.
all their games. Even in the mid 90s, their PC-98 games, they'd be like, let's try to target like the lowest user, like that, something that conceivably people are still using at the time.
Yeah.
And so you would get games that looked like they were from at least 5 years before, like when they were actually released, because they were dealing with such low specs. And the system, no matter what, just always had such terrible scrolling capabilities. Just inherently,
Yeah.
there was almost no way to fix it. There were some really, there's a couple of really good Dojin shooters that came out really late
Mhm.
in the PC-98's life, like after the system was dead, really, where they managed to get smooth scrolling going, but it required a ton of CPU power,
Yeah.
and not everybody had a fast CPU on their PC-98s. So,
It's kind of funny to hear it described as like, targeting minimum spec because I feel like today that's what PC gaming is again, where like everybody's targeting really low level graphics cards these days. Cause that, like, if you go look at the Steam charts and everything, like the most popular cards, all these lower cards and things like that now. So, um, when you were like playing games in the 90s, like, because, obviously game consoles come out and there's like this is Nintendo 64, the PlayStation, the Saturn kind of pop up. Were you one of those people who like you only purchased games kind of looking forward usually, or were you kind of going back and forth between the old consoles and the new consoles and things like that?
oh, definitely going back and forth. We never abandoned the old systems. We would
Mm.
still keep building our Game Boy collection or Game Gear or whatever. No matter how. Yeah, I was always like, I don't know. I still loved the 16-bit era and even the
Yeah,
8-bit era, even when the PlayStation and Saturn came out. So it was
yeah,
always just a natural thing for me. Like even when I became an adult, and I still keep building my PC Engine collection or even my PlayStation collection or
yeah.
whatever.
I think the thing that like stood out to me, someone asked me recently was like, "How did you get into retro games?" And I'm like, I don't know if I ever got into retro games. I think game systems just never left for me. Where it's like, when I was a kid, I started shopping at some local game stores that kind of kept everything in stock, used game stores, right? And it wasn't like a GameStop or EB Games, and they just had like giant NES collections and things like that. And so even though it was like GameCube era, I was I was still buying like NES games. Well, the NES I got into later, but you know, the older consoles that I had, I was still buying uh stuff for and things like that. So like to me, it didn't really ever feel like I like had that moment where I was like, oh man, let me pull out the Nintendo 64 and have a moment with it. It's just it never left me, right? Kind of thing. So
Yeah, yeah, same, same. I mean, it's not like I started retro gaming. It's more like I never stopped playing those old consoles, and at
yeah.
some point, suddenly they were retro. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess I have had a few of those moments where, like, especially when I moved to Japan. At first, I didn't have a lot of consoles. I left most of my stuff back in the U.S., and I ended up.
Mm.
I didn't know for sure how long I was going to stay in Japan when I moved to Japan, and I ended up pretty much just staying there for life. And so, eventually I had to start like gradually I don't have all of the systems that I used to own here in Japan, but I rebought. I have like another PC engine that I have here, my Japan
Mm.
PC engine, and I still have my old childhood Turbo Duo in the US. And but I've had those moments where I took out like a PC engine, I played a PC engine game for the first time in like 10 years. At some point, that thing, and I was like, well, this feels old, and especially I think I hooked it up to a flat screen with like no upscaler or anything, and it's like,
Just
yeah,
composite cables direct in.
this looks pretty bad now.
I remember it's like I need to go back and look at it, but do you know Final Fantasy VII Advent Children? The movie for Final Fantasy VII that came out
I've
in like
never
the mid
seen it.
2000s.
I know the name.
There's on the DVD there's a recap of Final Fantasy VII if you want to just watch the movie without playing the game, and it's like this really horrible capture of the game that somebody did, and it's like the first time I remember looking at something and being like, man, this looks really bad on a LCD screen kind of thing, because it's just like this really
Well,
bad
this is good.
composite
This brings the
capture.
conversation back around to CRTs and LCDs, because that was one of the main things I wanted to talk about, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So I'm a little curious, like, so I'm assuming, did you ever have a CRT when you got to Japan? Like, was that something that you
oh
acquired
yeah.
at any point, or
Oh
okay?
no, well, that's part of the thing, really. Um, Yeah, let's talk about that first. I mean, through most of my early adult life, CRTs were still just normal TVs. It's
Yeah,
still what everybody had. It wasn't until when I moved to Japan, I was still 21, and like it was 2001, and
yeah,
people were still using. I mean, that was what everybody had still. And even I felt a little bit like I had gone back in time moving into Japan, because people still watch like over the air TV in Japan even now. And like,
mm,
so it's over the air TV makes more sense, I'd say, in Japan, like regular old radio wave TV, just because I don't know, it's a smaller country, and you have basically six main channels that everybody gets, even
mm,
in the countryside. You get a few more in Tokyo that are like TV Tokyo and Tokyo MX, but throughout most of the country, you get six channels over the air, and most people don't watch cable TV, or never did. Even back then, in those days, I know in the U.S., a lot of people now don't watch cable TV; they have
yeah.
streaming instead. But back then, like it was everybody in the U.S. had cable. It seemed like it was just the normal thing. Like
Would part of it? I mean, this might be beyond you, but you know, welcome to speculate as much as you want. Would part of like the lack of cable? Maybe I shouldn't say the lack of cable, but like the
it
tendency to not
existed.
do
Of course,
cable.
cable and satellite TV existed in Japan, but it was much less popular, it seemed, in Japan than it was in the US.
Well, I was kind of curious if like the idea that like I know Japan's a lot more like a mountainous country and things like that. I would wonder if like actually laying the cables might be more expensive due to the terrain versus the US where it's like a lot of flat land and things like that. But I don't know. I'm
I think
just
it's
a random thought.
well, yeah, I mean, some definitely remote places
Yeah.
there's an issue there. Even nowadays with fiber internet to some point, yeah,
Yeah.
that is an issue, I believe. But most of Japan is pretty well connected, especially
Yeah.
nowadays. But I think even now there are some places, especially now where dying communities where hardly anybody lives now in the
Yeah.
countryside in Japan, and there probably are some places where yeah, satellite is the only
Yeah.
option. I think.
Yeah. But that
But I
makes a
don't
lot
know.
of
Yeah,
sense that you'd have a CRT because that's like still early 2000s, like
yeah. I
PS2
didn't get a
designed
CRT
for
until
CRT.
2000. Or I didn't get an LCD TV until 2006, and I
Mm,
did have an flat screen PC monitors. I think felt like they became a thing before flat screen TVs did,
yeah.
and I think my first flat screen PC monitor I had was in 2004, I believe. But and even then, before then, I mean, laptops all had LCD displays
Yeah.
on them too, even in the 90s.
They
So
had
the
terrible
technology
ghosting,
was
but
there.
yeah.
Yeah, the technology existed. I had a PC 98 laptop from the 90s with an
Oh,
LCD
really? You got
monitor on
in
it.
time for that to have an
Well,
actual.
no, I bought it
Okay.
when it was retro. But I bought that in 2004, 2003 or
Okay. Yeah.
2004. I got it. So it was like 10 years old when I bought it used, and
Gotcha.
but it looked pretty good on that monitor, and that the monitor that was on the laptop. The
Yeah.
old games look pretty good on it. So yeah, what the main thing I was saying is that CRTs were still just the normal TV. So I mean, and that was through a lot of my adult life. So that was kind of my relationship with CRT, is that
Mhm.
it just feels like the normal thing. Like even to me, like I look at a flat screen TV and I still see, like, even if it's just some old 720 or 1080p TV, is like, well, this is the future and everything. We have flat screen TVs now and everything. So I wouldn't it wouldn't feel weird. It's even still, like, if I go to a really crappy hotel in Japan, sometimes they'll have a CRT still there, and it
Yeah.
still looks normal to me. I was like, oh, they have a normal TV here still. So that's kind of my relationship. I don't even have that much nostalgia, though. Is the weird thing.
Yeah.
I think is the main. I don't have nostalgia that much for CRTs. Like, I really want to go back to them or something, is the weird thing for me. I think I'm kind of a minority in the retro gaming community, almost, because there's seems to be a lot of people are really nostalgic for CRTs, or definitely at least a certain subgroup
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
retro gamers. And I know definitely for retro PC gaming, most people, it seems like most people consider the CRT to be almost a must, a CRT monitor. And
Interesting, because I think it'd be in my eyes, it'd be opposite because like
it seems like
PC
it
games
should
are so
be.
sharp, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Definitely, I think that too. But definitely, one thing I wanted to make sure to differentiate is that CRT TVs and CRT computer monitors are two different things, right? Because,
Okay.
like, CRT computer monitors were always, almost always, starting in the 90s at least, they were always much higher resolution than a CRT TV. So you could
Yeah.
read text and stuff sharply on it. If you hooked a computer back then, it was harder to hook computers up to TVs back then, but if you had like a converter or something, they did exist, like a
Yeah.
downscale converter, and hooked a computer up to a TV, let's say like a 90s computer or even a PC
Mhm.
98 up to a TV. I used to have a converter that did that, by the way, and to an old CRT TV,
Yeah.
and the text is a lot harder to read, and like you see a lot less detail. So from the beginning, PC games were meant to be viewed on something much sharper.
Yeah.
So the comment, I get this comment a lot on my videos. It kind of annoys me, though. I like getting as many comments as possible on my videos. So, like, keep making the comments if you want to. You're like, but I get kind of annoyed when people say, like, you should play those PC 98 game, you should be playing on a CRT monitor. Like, you don't. The most annoying thing is, like, I've gotten this more than once. Like, you don't know what you're missing, basically, is what they say, by
Mm.
playing on a LCD monitor, compared to, like, how much better it would look on a CRT, because these that yeah, we can get into the arguments why, but yeah, go ahead, say
Yeah.
them.
I would be curious because like you made a differentiating line between like a TV and a monitor, right? And obviously resolution is the big gap there because if I recall correctly, a TV can do like an old school CRT TV. It depends on what you're doing, but most of them go up to like you typically would do like 240p or 480i, right? Would be like the resolutions for
That's
those, right?
typically what you would use, but
Yeah.
though people would say CRTs don't technically have a resolution, but most
Yeah, yeah.
game systems were typically 240, right?
But
And then later in
practically,
the
yes, yeah,
after the 32-bit area, you got some 480 content
yeah.
on there. But
And then you could hook a Sega Dreamcast up to like a CRT
yep.
monitor, and then you could use those at like 480p. And so that's kind of like in my mind when I think about like a CRT monitor versus a TV, that's like the gap there is going from that like composite 240p kind of look. Obviously, it depends on the country you're in and stuff, but most people that was probably the big gap. Um, is it just that is the gap between those two things, or because I haven't used a PC CRT in a long time, so I actually don't know what is unique about it, if anything, versus
I
normal
don't know
CRT.
that much either. All I
Yeah,
can say is that definitely PC monitors were a much higher resolution.
yeah,
CRT PC monitors, and from the 90s on at least, there were
mhm,
some systems in the 80s that used basically. There were some systems like even like the Apple II used composite out. So you did have
mm,
some early 80s PCs that you just basically just hooked it up to a TV or a computer monitor that was basically just a TV that couldn't receive TV signals.
gotcha.
Um, or but by the late 80s, then I mean they did have specialized RGB outs and
Mm,
monitors to go with the PCs, like late era PC 88s. And even early PC 88 was always a computer monitor system. There's only like I think one or maybe two models that have a CRT out on it, so you can hook it up to a TV if you want.
yeah,
And I actually know, there's one guy I think I can't remember. I have one viewer who mentioned to me that they bought that specific model of PC-88 so that they could hook it up to a CRT TV because I guess
yeah,
that was they wanted that lower res look for the 8-bit games, even though PC-88 games were never intended to be played. That
yeah,
wasn't. I mean, technically there was a model that you could do that, but they were mostly intended to be played on PC 88 monitors, which were a little sharper. I think most of them,
yeah,
definitely by the late 80s, they were basically um, 640 by 400 monitors. I
yeah,
think there's that gets a little more complicated, but basically they were higher res than the monitors people were using were higher resolution than TVs. So
yeah,
it
yeah.
was always like what you were saying, like you were thinking that maybe for retro PC gaming, it should maybe more people should be using flat screen monitors, you would think, because they were meant to be higher res from the beginning,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And so, and even going into that, the weird thing about PC 98 and PC 88 to some extent is that PC 98 was always meant to be shown on a monitor at 640 by 400
Mhm.
pixels, but I don't know the exact reason why, but it would always leave the top 40 and bottom 40 lines blank. So you would get basically a letterbox around
Yeah.
the top and bottom of the screen always when you're using a monitor that was intended for that particular system, which is weird, right? Like, why would you not use the whole screen? And I think my best theory
Yeah.
about that is I think they were using the same tubes, the 640 by 480 tubes that they used for like regular um, Western PCs. I think is my best theory anyway. And so it was easier to just not use those top 40 and bottom 40 lines. That's my best guess. I actually don't know the technical reason, so I might sound stupid to someone who knows, but you don't have to cut that. I'm
Oh,
fine
no,
like
we're
with
fine.
I'm fine
We're
with my
just
ignorance on that.
no, we're just talking. Yeah, because like when you say that, the first thing that comes to mind for me is like thinking about like FMV on old like Sega CD kind of systems, or like Doom on the Super Nintendo, where it's like we're going to crop this down so we get more resources elsewhere, kind of thing, right? Like, I feel like NES
Yeah.
games have a similar thing where they just like show
Wait, for
garbage on the side of the
performance,
screen.
yeah, for
Yeah,
performance reasons, they would use less of the screen. But
yeah,
it's different. The PC 98 is the reason is not the same. It's the
mm,
system's native resolution is 640 by 400, and that's just with only in later stage PC 9821 models in the 90s they made ones that could go up higher to higher resolutions than that. But the PC 98's default resolution, and in practice almost all games that were ever made for the the PC 98 run in 640 by 400.
yeah,
And so it's almost always a native 640 by 400 signal. And if you hook it up to even a monitor that was intended for PC98. You get these letterboxes to the top and bottom. So I didn't even know about this actually. Like, this is a really embarrassing admission, but it's fine. I didn't even wasn't even really aware of this like until like I started on YouTube. I used to just show my PC98 content upscaled to stretch to regular four by three
Yeah.
aspect ratio, because I just thought that was. I figured they used the whole screen. Why wouldn't they use the screen? These were made to be played on 4 to 3 CRT monitors. So, but and then people in Japan informed me. Some people who watched my videos are like,
Mhm.
actually, PC98, we always played it on a real PC98 monitor. It always had the letterboxes, and so the actual aspect ratio for PC98 is 16:10. So,
Mhm.
which is convenient also because that's close to 16:9, which is a modern flat screen, widescreen resolution. So when you upscale 16:10, the real PC98 aspect ratio to a 16:9 screen, you just get small letterboxes on the right and left sides of the screen
Yeah.
instead. I don't know if you would call those letterboxes. Actually, those are it's black space on
Black
the
space on the
left and
side
right
kind of thing.
sides
Yeah, yeah.
instead, which fills up most of the monitor. So
Yeah.
in a way, like I feel like I love playing PC98 now with an upscaler and a modern flat screen monitor, because you get a much larger viewing area than you ever got with a real PC98 CRT monitor. Like, everything
Yeah.
is so big on screen, and it's still the correct aspect ratio.
You mentioned earlier, because like when I think about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like when it comes to playing a PC98 on a C or on a LCD, you're gonna get the sharpness. You're gonna get like really. I think the thing I always say about PC98 is like it is a colorful system. The colors are gonna pop. That's why I think it. When you look at like Twitter PC98 posts, I think people like it because it is just this very vibrant thing, that kind of aligns with like Andy's from the '90s style and aesthetic to some extent. Um, would you say that's like accurate of just like it's like the big appeal of playing on an LCD is that everything is super sharp and then is like super colorful, or is there more there to it than that?
Well, it's complicated, I'd say, because
Mhm.
in the early days around PC98, when you're dealing with 8 and 16-bit systems, the resolution on the PC98 was obviously much higher than
Yeah,
even on actually when the 32-bit systems came out. The resolution that most of those games were running in was also lower than PC98. So as far as the sharpness and and yeah, the colors were nice, but there's definitely a caveat there. I gotta come back to with the color,
yeah,
but um, yeah, for the beginning, that was the appeal of one of the
Mhm.
appeals of PC gaming, is that you got much sharper graphics than you did in the with the contemporary game consoles at the
Yeah,
time. But PC98 has some weird limitations that were grandfathered in, and though it has a really huge color palette, it can only display 16 colors at a time on the normal
yeah,
with this normal old school regular color mode, which was limiting. Like, even when the I mean, I don't even know what the Super NES, but Super NES could do a comparable amount at the same time, if not more, I think.
was it
But
256?
was Super NES already too? It might be. I'm sounding
I
really dumb
can't
here now.
remember. I am the worst person to ask about this.
Super
So
NES probably actually did display more colors than the PC98
yeah,
did at once. So that was the big limiting factor with PC98, is how many colors you can display at once. And the other weird fact I've heard is, like, even though it's 16 colors at a time, technically it's actually 15 you can use, because I've
Mhm.
heard one of the colors gets used by the system, is what I've heard. Um, and
Interesting.
I don't actually know exactly what that means. I was like, if the system is using it, can't you display it? I was thinking, but apparently in the game you can only use up to 15 colors at a time on screen at once
Yeah,
from a much larger palette. Um, but that gave PC98 its distinctive look, I would say,
yeah,
because you had sharp graphics, but with only 15 colors being able to be being displayed on screen at a time, you had to use a lot of dithering, like mixing colors together,
yeah.
where you would you would switch off every other pixel would be a black pixel to make it look darker, or a white pixel to make it look lighter. And they use that technique a lot. And I think even if you're not like really aware of it, like you can see it really easily if you're
Yeah.
looking at even on an old monitor that that's the point I wanted to come back to. But it's it gave it that particular aesthetic that I think people even today, there's a lot of nostalgia for it now, especially like maybe even just 5 years ago there was suddenly this huge like PC 98 like nostalgia boom in Japan, because I think people who remember it were just at the right age where like the you know, nostalgia bug comes around after like
Yeah.
30 years or so. Um,
I mean, there's like an X68,000 mini that's out there now
yeah,
that people are like developing for and stuff.
that's another thing. Yeah,
Which
yeah.
I know is like a
There's a
very
few
late
other things like
PC
that,
thing, but yeah.
but anyway, there's a particular style because of that dithering that it used that makes you would look at it and you could look at it now, and if you knew PC 98 graphics, you would know right away, oh, those are PC 98 graphics. There are a few like retro style games people have made that specifically like are supposed to look like PC 98 games. There are only a few of these. I can't even name them, so sorry about that.
Yeah, no
Uh
problem.
but yeah, there's definitely a particular look to it. And the other point I wanted to make with CRTs is that people will, like I was saying, people will comment and say, like, you don't know what you're missing not playing on a CRT. But even if you were using a real PC 98 CRT monitor to play the games, it was always visible. Like
Yeah.
it was always sharp enough that if you didn't have to look very carefully to see the dithering with the blacks and the white pixels mixed in there. It was always visible if you didn't have to look even that closely to notice it. So it's not like people will say like the thing about CRTs is that the colors blend together more, so you get this
Yeah.
sense of like it's more blended. That's the way it's meant to look. And I think that's a much stronger point to make with CRT TVs than it is with CRT monitors. That's definitely a valid reason to like CRT TVs for console gaming. But I think for PC gaming, it's much less of a valid point. Well, maybe I
What
don't want to say it's invalid, but it's
Yeah.
much less of a thing. I think you still get much of the same graphical look to it on a modern, just clearer and sharper on a
Yeah, yeah.
modern flat screen display than you did back in the day on an actual PC 98 monitor.
So when someone makes a comment like that, obviously you said that like you don't think there's like a big difference there. Like what do you think is the thing they see that is the difference for them when
There's
they
definitely a difference, obviously, when you turn on a
Mhm.
CRT TV or a CRT monitor, you get that hum to it, and
Yeah.
it has a different glow to it. Like the light in the tube definitely gives a different kind of feel to it than you get. It's like a difference between like shooting a picture on film or versus a digital camera
Yeah.
or something, right? There's definitely just a different feel to it, different look to it. I don't know if I can't articulate it well enough, but obviously I understand. There's definitely a difference, and
Yeah, like, physical hardware is a weird thing because, like, obviously, I run the PCFX fan club, and that's, like, a very distinct looking PCFX. I know that there's a PC 98 that you've talked about that looks like it as well, but the
PC
tower or what
88, PC
88,
88
sorry, yeah.
MC, yeah.
But, like, I think putting someone down in a room with the PCFX sitting beside the monitor they're playing on, it feels like a very different experience than putting someone down with an emulator playing a PCFX. Is that's my impression is like when I see people playing something like that, even if they don't have any experience with it, I don't know if it's like the novelty factor, right? Of just like trying something in a form factor that it feels like it was originally intended to be in, even if you can't really tell much of a difference, right? Um, it's one of those things
So
that's really hard to put into words, I feel
yeah.
like.
So do
Yeah.
you think that's the main difference, is having the real hardware there in front of them to see like this is the way we played it? We put the disc in and the system on the top here and the power button was here and the controller felt like this. Would you say that's the main difference, you think, for real consoles versus emulation?
Well, I was actually going to ask you because you had this question about like if a CRT, or like, well, I guess the way you presented this initially to me was like, are CRTs feel overrated for? I don't know if it's just for PC games you're talking about versus both systems, but you still play games on the original hardware, right?
Still haven't given my opinion on CRTs, CRT TVs for consoles, or even PVMs. Like,
Yeah, yeah. But I
um,
guess like kind of going down that original hardware route at the very least first before we get too deep into that is like what why do you still use original hardware? Do you feel like?
yeah, for me, it's still mostly just having the original hardware here and putting the discs physically in there, and or even with a system like PC 98 where you're not even necessarily using a disc.
Yeah.
Um, just knowing that it's the real thing. Like, I don't know when it comes down. I don't know if that doesn't. There's maybe not a satisfying answer, but
Mm,
with emulation, especially like um, PC 98, there is definitely a lot of emulator issues still, where like particular games will just not run
yeah.
correctly or something. So you don't have to worry about that, at least. Or well, actually, you do. On real hardware, we do have a lot of issues with games. Well, I don't know. Yeah, okay, maybe that isn't a good point then. Um,
Well, I think what I was going to say was like with the PCFX, like one of my problems right now is the disk drive's dying on mine. And
it's
so
a,
even though I want to have that experience that feels like it's
mm,
like I'm getting it right, games are crashing nonstop because my PCFX can't keep up anymore.
yeah,
And so it's like this weird thing where like I still want to play on original hardware almost for like the idea that it will be better more than actually being better sometimes.
yeah, and I still would rather play on a real console with like an
Mhm.
optical disc emulator on it than
Yeah.
a full like emulator on a PC or
Yeah.
something. But it's still at least using mostly the real hardware, just not the real disk drive. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure someone would argue that takes a certain part away of it, part of the appeal
Yeah.
for playing on a real console too. With that, I don't know, but I think the reasons are just different for everyone. It's just
Mhm.
something, I don't know, something about it for me, like having a real PC 98 here and just pressing power on it and just working with the real hardware. I'm not sure. And with consoles too. I mean, I don't know, having the real games and the hardware. It's not something I can really articulate though. It just feels wrong. I don't want to play on an emulator for longer than I need to. I mean, emulators nowadays mostly for most systems work fine. They work perfectly for the most
Yeah.
part. They're good enough for most people, I would say for sure. And even from I mean, I've played some games on emulators recently where I games systems where I don't have the particular console here in Japan, and I for whatever reason, like for well, just if I need there's a particular game I need to talk about or need to re-experiencing it and I don't have the console here, sometimes I'll just play it on the emulator, and the experience is fine. You can play the games.
Yeah.
It's most of for NES, SNES, I mean the emulators for the most part run perfectly for almost all games. So I don't know, but it
Hmm.
uh, another interesting comment I've gotten, or a certain category of comment I've gotten on some of my videos, again for PC 98 or PC 88 videos, where people are saying things like, I have keyboard converters for both my PC 88 and PC 98, which allow you to use a modern USB keyboard and also mouse
Hmm.
on the PC 98 and the PC 88. I have the keyboard one too. Uh, but so nowadays, I'm usually using uh, a modern keyboard and mouse when I'm
Yeah.
playing PC 88 or PC 98, and I've had people comment and say like, "Well, if you're not using a real keyboard and mouse, you'd might as well just use an emulator, right?"
Yeah.
So, and that brings up the question then, is like, is that the main thing for you? Like having a real like old clickety clackety keyboard is the main appeal of and I know for some people that's an important thing. Like the same, usually generally the same folks who have a modern, or not a modern, who have a PC 98 set up with a CRT monitor. Most of them also want to have an original keyboard too, because they consider that to be part of the experience too, and
Yeah.
probably a mouse too. Um, So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like for me, it's fine. I mean, obviously, I'm fine with using a um, I don't know if it's my first choice. I wouldn't mind having a real, like, old school keyboard, a real PC 98 keyboard connected to my PC 8. I don't have a problem with it. Like, my main issue really is just I live in a tiny place in Japan, and when I used to have I was using a real PC 88 keyboard for
Mhm.
my oldest PC 88 videos, and just storing it became an issue. Like, and always having to take it out,
Yeah.
and I have like a small desk space that has my modern PC and my PC 88, my PC 98, and always having to just switch out keyboards all the time, inconvenient. And I just didn't really have a good place, is the main thing, to keep my PC 88 keyboard where I felt like I wasn't going to be damaging it or something, taking it out all the time and
Yeah.
putting it away. I would like wrap it in bubble wrap and then just put it. I had like a place I could slide it in, but I was worried it was going to get broken or something, and keys fall off all the time on old keyboards and stuff. So,
Yeah.
um,
One thing I'd be curious to know if this like resonates with you is that like when you were talking about earlier about like wanting to play on real hardware versus like an emulator, it's like to me it almost feels like a feeling of worrying you're missing something, if that makes sense. Um, like for example, um, there's two examples in my head that I want to use, and one is way more up my alley, and the other one's maybe a little bit more up like your alley, maybe. So I'll use the one up your alley for the sake of that. But I was gonna ask you, do you know Mega Man?
yes, I have
um,
heard this.
yeah.
You mean
I
like Rockman in Japan?
Rockman, yeah, yeah. I forget what Mega Man game it is. I feel like it is the one that has Gemini Man in it. I could be wrong, but
Mega
there's
Man 3.
three, maybe. Yeah, there's like a sequence at the start of his stage, I think. And I'm not a Mega Man person, so if this I'm getting this entirely wrong, whatever. But like when you're walking, there's like stars in the sky, right? Um, and if you play it on the way I played it, Wii Virtual Console, those stars are all just white stars, right? But if you look at the night sky in real life, there's a variety of colors up there, despite them generally looking white, right? But like when you're like the planets have different colors and things like that. And when you play it on a CRT, those stars, the way that like the color bleeding and stuff works, they get different colors. So when you play on a CRT, it looks more like a variety of stars going through. Almost, it makes sense. And like if you play on an emulator, like when I played that on WBC, you miss that, if that makes sense, right?
Hmm.
Like, do you think like it's a fear of like I'll miss something like that if I play it on an emulator, where like something will go wrong and I won't see this the way the artist intended, kind of thing? Or
Well, I'm not really familiar with that specific example, though I'm very familiar with that game.
I
I
could
don't
be
think I've really
wrong as
played it
well,
on an emulator, but
but that concept I think is just what I'm trying to present to you.
they're even more than emulator versus real hardware. I think that's probably a CRT versus flat screen
Yep.
display issue more than even it is specifically an emulator issue, right? Um, I think the one they bring up, the one I hear the most, is the waterfalls on Sonic the Hedgehog. I think it's either Sonic
Yeah.
1 or 2 or both of them. There are these waterfalls where they don't look right unless you're using a
Mhm.
CRT, where that doesn't look the effect of the water falling doesn't look the way it's supposed to if the resolution is too high, basically.
Would
Um,
that bother you if you had to decide
It
between
doesn't
two
actually
waterfalls?
bother me that much. I
Mhm.
think that's one of the points people bring up when they're defending CRTs a lot, is things like that, and then also the kind of depth you get from like the dithering, like when you have like characters pixels, especially like in fighting games with larger characters, you would have
Yeah.
around the edges of like someone's arms, you would have darker colors to try to make it look like it has more depth, or like this is like it's tapering off or something. And when you look at
Mhm.
something like that on a flat screen TV, like with an upscaler or without one, either way, like it's it's gonna look more flat. Like you're gonna see the pixels and the
Yeah.
colors more, and with a CRT, you're not going to see the specific pixels as easily, at least unless maybe if you have a huge CRT, you will notice it.
Yeah.
But um, uh, that's one of the main arguments for a CRT. Like, this is the way it was intended to be viewed, was on a CRT. And even when they were designing some of these games, you can see old footage of some game designers where they were developing the game. They were drawing the pixels with a mouse on a PC monitor, but
Mhm.
next to the PC monitor, they would have a CRT TV so they could see at the same time what it's going to look like on a
Yeah.
CRT TV when it's done, when people are actually playing it. So that's one of the main, I mean, that's the main thing people bring up all the time. It's like, it's not going to look right if
Yeah.
on a flat screen. These games were never intended to be played on a flat screen TV,
Mhm.
or monitor. And
Can you think of anything that represents that similar idea using original hardware, like the actual PC-98 for you? Like something where you feel like this was originally designed to be this way, but I feel like I would have missed it.
like emulator versus
Yeah,
real
yeah.
hardware, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Um, I The main thing that used to bother me, I think, on PC-98 emulators is you would get a lot of stray pixels and stuff that shouldn't be there when it's like updating, when it's up when the screen is updating. You would sometimes
Mhm.
get like these weird like white pixels in places they're not supposed to be, and stuff that you can see on the emulators. And I'm I usually don't I can't see those on real hardware. Those don't show up, so I don't know what causes that.
Mhm.
I know that was mainly, mainly used to use some really bad PC-98 emulators back in the day. Back in the day, they used to use an emulator called Annex 86, which is completely now defunct and hasn't been updated for over 20 years. So don't use it. Like, it's still one of the easiest to use PC-98 emulators, so it's tempting, but I use it for really quick tasks sometimes. But
Yeah.
don't like actually play a game on that emulator if you can avoid it. Usually, some flavor of Neko Project 2 are the best PC-98 emulators, but I think I've still seen that issue come up even on Neko Project 2,
Mhm.
um, where you get these weird stray pixels sometimes. But I mean, like I was saying before, the thing actually with PC-98 is, it was such a long running computer series that there's a lot of different flavors of PC-98 and a lot of different CPU speeds and everything that's going to make the
Yeah.
game run differently anyway from the way it was originally intended to be played, no matter what. So it's not, with consoles, I think it's a really strong argument that this is the way it
Yeah.
runs the same on every console and everything. So, but PC-98, I've had actually the opposite problem where I remember one game I've covered on the channel is the second Burai game, which is not actually called Burai 2. It has a weird long game, but let's just say Burai 2 for PC-98. It's called Burai 2.
Yeah.
The credits sequence, for some reason, on some PC-98 models, I don't know the actual reason, the credits just don't come up at the end of the game. It freezes up and the credits don't display on some later PC-98 models like mine. So I actually had to go over to an emulator instead in order to see the credits sequence. So I showed that in my video too. I was like, it doesn't work on my PC-98. Here's it working on an emulator. Kind of thing. So sometimes it's the opposite problem with the emulators. At least you can emulate some of the earlier models that you don't own, like an earlier model. Like, what would it look like on an older PC-98? And so actually, the emulators can do that kind of thing. And actually, I've discovered like more tools now for real PC-98 hardware that'll allow you to some extent replicate like what this would look like on an older PC-98. There's a main tool I bring up all the time on the channel called ER Cache. It's like, people are probably sick of me hearing me say it on the channel. I used ER Cache again for this game and this one and everything, because there's so many games where it just doesn't run 100% correctly on my PC-98, and you can make little tweaks with this tool called ER Cache. But the thing
Yeah.
is, it's a really difficult tool to get around. There's so many different things you can do with it, and it's not very user friendly. So it takes a lot of tweaking. But
Yeah.
I think now I could probably get those credits to scroll. I haven't tried it, but I bet I can get those credits to display now on my PC-98 with ER Cache. But yeah, in some cases, actually, when you're talking about PCs, you can, in some ways, the emulator can be more accurate than
Yeah.
real hardware. It was my point, I guess, I wanted to make there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that there's like such a difference there because with CRTs, it's like very a binary thing. Because I'm trying to like figure out like where your line is. I think on like what is the importance of original hardware. Because I think there's probably some people who use CRT. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Use CRTs and they have some specific reason they're using it, right? Um, and like picking out what that is
They do, and
yeah.
I mean, they yeah, definitely. If you talk to a CRT fan, and there are plenty of all of them out there, they'll give you lots of good reasons. And I don't mean any disrespect, because I totally understand a lot of the reasons. I think the main thing for me, like I there's definitely advantages to
Mhm.
CRTs, and definitely the time lag, the delay is the input delay
Yeah.
is a huge issue. I think for modern displays, whether you're using an upscaler or just connecting directly to a modern TV, you're going to get some lag no matter what. So it's not going to be instantaneous the way it was intended to be on a CRT.
Mhm.
So for things like shooters, shmups, and like fighting games where the input like lag is such a big issue, then definitely like CRTs do make sense. Even though I still do my best to play those games, even
Yeah.
because I'm a flat screen guy, and I don't have the space for any kind of CRT in my place right now. It's not something I want to invest any significant amount of space in my living space here in Japan for a CRT. Um, but getting back to your other point, I often wonder, like, if you it's possible to hook like a modern PC up to an old CRT if you have the right equipment, like a
Yeah.
downscan converter and stuff. If you and you could get a modern Windows like NES emulator running and hook it up to a CRT TV, and you could get it working to the point where it looks about the same size on screen that
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
supposed to. I wonder then if you had, and there's ways then to hook up a real NES controller to the people have made adapters to a PC. So then once you have a real controller and a CRT TV, I wonder if that's good enough then at some point. If you could probably trick on like even like most people, you could trick most people, even like NES
Oh,
enthusiasts.
I would
I
have
think
no idea.
if you
Yeah.
had if you hid the PC and just had the controller there and the CRT screen, you could nobody would know, like,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So, um, if that's the main thing for some people, I often wonder, like, if they wouldn't be just happy then, like, if a real PC-98 keyboard is the main appeal for you, there are converters to use real PC-98
Mhm.
keyboards on a modern PC. Get one of those, then play on an emulator. Then
Yeah.
get a CRT monitor, then a real PC-98 keyboard, and just use a regular Windows PC. Is that good enough for you? I'm sorry
Yeah.
to.
Well, one thing you mentioned is like the space you have available, right? You're like, I would use an original keyboard, but space. And then you said I could use a CRT, but space. Is it just like a like if you had the space, do you think you would overcome that and get a CRT even if you didn't necessarily think it was like the best thing all the time?
If I had unlimited space, or at least
Mhm.
if I had a very large house and like a gaming room,
Yeah.
it's something I might do. I know my brother Neo Alec does have a CRT in his gaming room that he uses, and he likes to use that for his old consoles that were meant to be played on CRTs. And his TV is actually modded to take a SCART RGB connection. He
Mm.
modded it himself. He's got a video on our channel, by the way, where he shows how to mod, how he did that mod. And yeah, I don't feel like it would be an absolute must for me. I
Yeah.
think my brother probably wants it, would really wanted it, but, and I know my other brother Stu is totally a CRT guy. Like, he's even fine with like composite, I think, on a lot of old consoles. But for me, I think I'm not really that much of a CRT guy. I wouldn't, it would be nice to have, but I don't know if I would even use it necessarily, because I do like flat screen TVs.
I have a CRT for only my PCFX. That's the only reason it exists in my house, and it's nice because I haven't shown it to you, but like it's like this size, so it's like I don't know 8 inch kind of thing. It's
Yeah,
very small.
you don't get a lot of screen real estate for CRTs without spending a lot of money, especially
Yeah, yeah.
nowadays.
technically this is like a, I don't know if it's called, because like Sony's I think are technically PVMs. This is a Panasonic, so I don't know what that's categorized
There's
as.
Sony TVs too,
But
of
it's a
course,
broadcast monitor, basically. It's one of those
and
where it's like at
PVM.
the
Yeah,
long back to
PVMs
to
especially
thing.
are usually tiny, right?
Yeah, yeah. And usually what I use it for is because PCFX is so reliant on full motion video, um it helps me better appreciate those scenes because when I play on my retro tink or whatever like that, the unfortunate situation is I'm capturing gameplay for a YouTube channel. And so I
Yeah,
can't necessarily put scan lines on because I don't know if you've solved this problem, but scan lines on a YouTube video is always a problem. It feels like it's always
I
bad.
just don't use them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really like scan lines anyway. So, and
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think more what I'm trying to do is like what was this video supposed to look like in the first place, right? Because when people talk about like, oh, the animation quality on a PCFX, oh, it looks like what you would have saw on TV. And when I look at it on the CRT, I can see that, right? But when I'm looking at it through like my retro tink upscaled kind of thing, pure crisp, that's definitely the big thing. And I will say the reason I have this TV here is only because I'm the PCFX fan club guy. If I wasn't doing that, this TV would not be here.
so did you
So
start PCFX playing PCFX on flat screen monitors, modern displays?
yeah, I
So what
played
what was your reaction though when you first got the PVM and you hooked it up to it? What did you think? Did it look a lot better to you?
yeah, I think in some ways I always knew probably what it would look like. I think I just kind of assumed the smoothing would like, take out those pixels and things like that because like it's low quality FMV. At the time high quality, now low. But and so like I think that was the big thing there, like is it definitely smoothed that over in a way where like if you told me I was watching a VHS or something like that, somebody who doesn't watch VHS I should say, so maybe it's a bad example, I probably would say sure, right, that this is like a VHS release of First Kiss Story. I don't know. But I think that's like the big reason I have a CRT right now. But like I said, it's because in some ways I just feel like as someone who runs the PCFX fan club, I feel like I should know. But that's also a very important part of the system. Um, I don't know if it feels as important on PC98, which is kind of
It
your
doesn't.
main beat. Yeah, like
It
because
doesn't.
I
That's the main thing I'm doing on the channel. But yeah, I
yeah,
can speak for consoles for sure too.
yeah,
Couple of points I wanted to make there.
go
Like
for it. Yeah.
first of all, I think that particular generation of consoles, the 32-bit generation, it's usually referred to with the PS1 and the Saturn and the
Mhm.
N64 and the PCFX sometimes considered part of that generation. It's part of that generation.
I would say so,
But
yeah.
that particular generation I think looks particularly terrible
Yeah.
on on modern displays, right? And maybe to some extent also the generation after that, the PS2 generation too, looks pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I think because that was the generation really where they were going for photorealism for the first time in a lot of the games. They were going for maybe not. I mean, with an anime game, actually, obviously, it's not going to look like a photo, but they were. It was supposed to look. It was supposed to look very high res
It's
on a
supposed to look like
regular.
anime cells.
Yeah, it
It
was
was
supposed to look almost as, like you said, almost as good as a VCR or a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
broadcast TV, and not just the FMV, but the just the in-game graphics too, like where they looked very. It was to the point where like it was very hard to pick out the individual pixels in that generation if you were playing on a CRT TV. Like it was to the point where it looked like almost the resolution was almost perfect. Like it was as high as it needed to be by that point. It felt
Yeah.
like, and maybe it wasn't. If you had a big CRT, maybe you could say like, "Oh no, I could see all the pixels. It was still too pixely."
Yeah.
Definitely Sega CD FMV always looked terrible. Um, P- PCFX, I also thought, though of course it looked pretty good. I never thought that PCFX FMV was perfect either.
Yeah.
I always thought it looked even worse than a VHS. Really, I was kind of disappointed when I first got my PCFX, and of course, I was
Mm.
playing on CR. We all we had was CRTs back then.
Do you
When
remember
I
what
got
games
mine,
you were playing or at the time?
the first games, I went over this on the last
It's
podcast
been
I
a
did,
while, so
but what was the very first game? The very first game I popped in, I believe, was Akazukin Cha Cha,
yeah, okay.
the board game, and the FMV, and like I don't remember if that's one of the better, probably one of the worst looking games, or maybe just average looking for the PCFX for the
I think it's
FMV.
average if I were to put
Average.
it.
The thing that like just the thing that bothers me the most about that game is how it's like all these little clips from the anime series, and they're all just kind of really short and just they get kind of cut off really quickly. And
Yeah.
it always felt so like cheap and like kind of roughly put together, the way it just shows a clip and just blah 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 blah, and then it's just over.
Yeah.
Like, okay, but I always thought, I had heard before getting my PCFX, like, oh my god, the video is so clear on the
Mhm.
PCFX. I had heard from more, at least one or two people, and I thought, no, I think my expectations were maybe a little too high, but I thought,
Mhm.
no, really doesn't look that good, and doesn't really sound that good either. To me, it was my reaction. I mean, it looks fine, but it looks better than Saturn FMV anyway. But PlayStation could do some really good FMV. I think it needed to have the disc needed to be spinning at double speed, so you could only fit 35 minutes of FMV on the
Oh,
disc, even
wow.
if that's all you put. I think that's the reason Final Fantasy VII is three discs, is because of the FMV, right?
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. And I've even heard, I think that technically the data on all three discs on Final Fantasy VII, I think, is the same, and it's just the FMV that's different.
Interesting.
Basically,
I didn't know about
I've
that.
heard.
Yeah.
I've heard at least not tech. Obviously, you need the first disc to boot, but I've heard
Yeah.
like the whole game is actually on all three of the discs. It's just the FM. That I don't know. Hopefully I'm not wrong about this, but I remember hearing that somewhere. So it might be some old wives' tale or something. But that's what
Funnily
I've.
enough,
But
I know the guy who probably knows that best, because, there's a guy called Shademp, I believe. I forget how you pronounce it. I think he's somewhere in Europe, and, he is, like, the Final Fantasy VII guy, like, spending thousands of dollars on, like, a Toshiba DVD so he can rip that specifically for, like, beta versions of the cutscenes and things like that. So but you probably would know. Um but that's interesting to hear because, like, I kinda have to when I look at the PCFX, as somebody who was not involved in that generation in any meaningful way, or PCFX in any meaningful way at the time, I kind of am trusting other people's accounts of it at the time, right? Because I can look at it and yeah, it looks like FMV from that era to me, right? One
yeah,
thing I would like to do is maybe go back and compare all the opening cutscenes from Blue Breaker, because I think Blue Breaker is one of the better looking FMV games on, like, the FMV in that game is one of the better looking ones for the PCFX. Because that's kind of in a lot of ways kind of the PCFX killer app towards the midlife of the system. So
yeah, that would be a good comparison, because I think the
yeah,
point I was trying to make there was that um, PS1 actually could do better FMV than PCFX did, but
yeah,
PCFX was better than Saturn. And so Bluebreaker, I think, is a good example. If I remember correctly, it works perfectly. The worst looking one is the Saturn one. The PCFX one is medium, and the PS1 looks the best for the FMV. If they did do bother to do good PS1 FMV in that game, and I think I remember that it does have better looking FMV than the PCFX version. And probably one of my main problems is that we already had a Saturn and a PlayStation at my house before we got a PCFX, and
yeah,
so I was kind of expecting like crystal clear FMV on the
yeah.
PCFX, because that was kind of its main thing. And then when I got it, I was like, I've seen better FMV on the
Like,
PlayStation already. So
laser disc quality, you think would be probably a closer.
that would definitely be expecting too much, but but I had been told that, oh my god, it's so clear,
Yeah,
which is by what standard is I mean, maybe it was impressive for some people. I'm sure if
yeah,
you bought a PCFX on the release date, especially if you didn't have a PlayStation and Saturn, which were released at almost the exact same time in Japan, you
mhm,
you might have. I'm sure some people were impressed with it at that point, but
yeah. When it comes to getting back to CRTs a little bit, I'm kind of curious because you've mentioned a few times that like people are like you're missing out on something, right? Eh, I would be curious to know if you feel like they're missing out on something by not being okay with like an LCD with PC98 or really any system. I keep saying PC98 because that's what your beat is. I shouldn't be
Oh, that's
saying
good.
that.
I always end up talking about the PC98 anyway, just because
Yeah,
that's my main thing I'm doing on the channel now.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. Um, I don't know. I have to wonder. Well, to preface it all, everyone, of course, should play the way they prefer to play. When it comes down to it, it's all up to personal preference, and I have total respect if you like,
Mhm.
if the way you want to play is on a CRT. And I think that's totally cool, and I think it's awesome that you have a CRT, and it's cool how you're replicating the actual experience of how people played it back then in every way. And that's if that's the way you want to do it, then definitely cool. But more power to you. I think
Mhm.
it's awesome. I will like your pictures of it on Facebook and the PC98 group or whatever,
Yeah.
um and totally, I would totally play with PC98 with you. Play PC98 on your setup and love it, sure. But my preferred way is with the flat screen. It's like a dream for me. Like it looks much better than it ever did back in the day, and which I should preface it though with, for me, for PC98, I've never owned a real PC98 monitor. I've seen them in shops here in Japan
Mhm.
and things. So maybe there's something I'm missing out, but I personally, from what I remember, like, it's just it looks so good. The display is so big on a modern flat screen widescreen monitor for PC98, and the look is, sure it has a different glow than a CRT would have. A different update rate. Maybe your eyes can tell the difference the way it's updating the screen differently, but not a different uprate rate, I should say, but just, the way CRTs have like a tube that goes like that across
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah.
No one can see what I'm doing, uh, but it updates differently. You can see if you're videotaping a CRT with a camera. Obviously, you can see the way it's updating with the line going down the screen.
Yeah.
Um,
Is there a difference between Japanese and US PC monitors in that regard or
I think probably not really. I mean,
okay.
the monitors they sold for PC98 were definitely different. They were made to be used with PC98. There's a different hertz rate. Yeah, they use.
Okay.
I don't know. Probably didn't make a huge visual difference. Somebody might say I'm completely wrong on that, but
It's one of those things that
it's
like I'm a guy who like am perfectly fine something running at 30 frames per second. So like knowing the hertz rate of a monitor to me is just like
the hertz
but
rate was not really an issue back then, because for PC98 the frame rate was always so terrible anyway. Like the
yeah.
scrolling, it cannot do scrolling for the most part. Like there are
Mhm.
certain games, dojin games, where they finally made the scrolling like pretty smooth
Yeah.
and stuff, but for the most part the frame rate was always so bad that the hertz rate just doesn't even come into play. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Do you cuz sometimes something I have noticed with some people in terms of like people missing out on things is like they will be so committed to getting a very specific setup, they may not bother with something in the first place. So they might be saying, I don't want to play PC98 games until I can have original hardware with the
I think
monitor,
that
with the
I think there
thing.
are a lot of people who have that attitude,
Yeah.
and there's something to be said. Like it's just different for each person. Like where how far you want to go to replicate like what it was really like having a
Hmm.
PC98 in the 90s. Obviously, you would have had a CRT monitor. So if that's your goal, is to if your goal is to have an exact setup just like someone would have actually had back then sure, like you're going to need
Yeah.
a real keyboard and a real PC98 mouse and a monitor, all of those things.
What would you
So
say is the easiest way for people to get into playing um again, PC98. I feel like I keep restricting us to
emulators.
PC98, but emulators. Like what kind of like because I don't do emulators much, but I think for the most part, you're gonna probably the console emulators are pretty straightforward, right? I feel like all those you have a pretty standard set of consoles So there's going to be probably an emulator out there. If you just Google it, right, you'll figure it out. But I feel like maybe PC 98 might be a little bit more challenging because you're setting up an actual PC, right? I could be wrong. I feel like you're setting up an actual PC with an operating system. There's like a process to it. You mentioned earlier, there's like it's easier to set up one versus the other, but one is a lot worse kind of thing. So, like, what is the easiest path to get into it in that regard?
That's another thing because I get that comment a lot on my YouTube videos where people are saying like, "Oh, I would like to get into PC 98, but the emulation just seems too complicated."
Yeah.
That, but I think people overall should be less afraid because it's really not as hard as people think. I'm gonna say
Mm.
overall, it's definitely not as hard as people think. The emulators themselves are generally pretty easy to set up. I think the main thing for setting them up that throws a lot of people for a loop is that most co- most console emulators nowadays are self-contained. You just download the emulator and it just works. But for for copyright reasons, most PC emulators don't contain the original BIOS from the
Yeah.
system, which it needs to run. So, for legal reasons, they won't. The emulator author won't include the BIOS with it, so it won't. The emulator won't run until you steal the BIOS from some pirate site, and they're easily available. You can find the BIOS like really easily. A lot of times, you'll just have to download the BIOS separately, or on Internet Archive, there are actually plenty of people who upload the emulator with the BIOS that you need, so it's all ready to go.
Yeah.
But that's the first hurdle, is just making sure you have the BIOS so that the emulator works at all, which is, I think, again, it's overstated. You just need to have it set up correctly, and I mean, follow the instructions, and it'll work. And then, um, so basically, with PC 98, you have different types of media, right? You have floppy disk games, you have a hard drive, and you have also even CD drives for some games, which are a little bit more rare. But for the most part, you're dealing with floppy disks and hard disks, right? Hard
Yeah.
drives. They usually call them hard disks in Japan. So sorry, the hard drive, let's say. Um, the thing is, though, most of the games that you're gonna find, I mean, on the high seas, I mean, let's be real, that's the way most people are gonna get them, is not through necessarily legal means, which is fine if you're willing to do that.
Amazing
It's
packaging, I will say. If you like physical game packaging, PC 98 games have a
and
lot going
Yeah,
on.
and even if
So,
you have the real games, I think there's no moral. I don't find it morally wrong to like download a backup of a game that
oh
you
yeah.
already own from the high seas. I mean, technically they say you're supposed to make a backup yourself from your own stuff, but I mean, who does that? I mean, if they can easily just get it, download it one from them. Even
I
Nintendo did it themselves when they apparently
yeah.
when they Mario 1, I think. But anyway, um so, and you have, when you download the games for PC 98, you're going to have floppy games, you're going to have hard drive games, and the ones that need to be installed on a hard drive, they have pre-installed hard drive images. So you don't need to
Mm,
set up anything yourself. They have literally, it'll come on a hard drive image, and you just put it in the hard drive slot in the emulator and start up the emulator, and the game will just begin. So, I
yeah.
mean, it's not as hard as people think. And I've had people, I usually like to show the game installation process on my videos. So when there's a game that has a hard drive install, I'll show like this is the way you would install the game with the floppy disks. And I've heard some commenters say that that scares them away. Oh, it looks too difficult to
Yeah.
do and
Yeah.
everything. Which is, that's valid, but if it's maybe too much trouble. But the thing is, you're not going to have to do that part because it's already, the ones you're going to find available online are already pre-installed. They're all ready to go for you, so you don't have to do that part. Don't be afraid of it. Like, it's just, my main point, I guess, I want to make is that PC 98 and PC 88 emulator may be a little bit more complicated than console emulation, but I think the fear is a little bit too high. Like,
Yeah.
it's not that difficult once you, I mean, you figure out maybe the first couple of quirks to it, but
Yeah.
you'll figure it out if you want to get into it. Definitely, I encourage you to get into it if you want to.
Have you ever messed with any of the official emulators? I think there's like Project Egg or something like that that's on PC
No,
and I think Switch now and things like that.
yeah, official emulators. Those, I believe, are done with the blessing of the whoever owns the game
Yeah,
at this. I
there's
don't know if
products that are sold.
I
So
don't
yeah.
know if NEC, maybe they are. I don't know how far NEC is on board with those, if they actually gave them permission to emulate their systems or not,
I
or
mean,
if
they're
they
selling
just
them on
use like third
Switch,
party
so
BIOS and everything. Oh, they're definitely
yeah,
they have the legal right to do it one way or another.
yeah.
No, yeah, okay, that's not what I was trying to. I wanted. I don't know if it uses the original BIOS or they just engineered their own copy
Oh, I see.
PC98 BIOS, but yeah, they're totally
Yeah.
legit and legal to use. I haven't used them very much, obviously, because I have the real hardware, so I don't really have. I usually just buy the look for the original one, the original
Mhm.
games, and then play them on real hardware. So there's been a couple of games that I bought for Project Egg for some of the other systems, like um, FM7 or Sharp X1, Fujitsu FM7, or some of the more rare PCs. Or even there was one game I had to show not too long ago. One of the highlight games I had to show for FM, or was it X1? X1, where it was I couldn't find it available anywhere else, so I had bought it on Project Egg, and yeah, I just I don't know. I haven't played much of their stuff, but it seems to run really well. It's fairly simple. It's made for each game to be self-contained, so it's easier than a normal emulator if you want to pay money for that. I think the main appeal really is that it's completely legit. Like you're not breaking any laws or anything. In Japan, they actually do enforce copyright law very strictly, actually. So if you're living here
Yeah.
in Japan, you want to be really careful about that kind of thing. But if you're overseas, you're probably honestly not going to get in any trouble for stealing an old PC98
Yeah.
game or something. Not that I'm necessarily encouraging it, but yeah, a lot of the games are available totally legally, and like Project Egg, like most of their stuff is it's not I don't think it's totally user friendly in English, but they do have means where you can purchase the games from overseas. We don't need to live in Japan, and there's some English resources. The games obviously are all still in their original language. There's no English in them,
Yeah.
but yeah,
I
that's a
seem to
great
recall
way.
like the interface menu, like if you need to make changes outside the game, that stuff is in English. Like if you need to go into like the emulator options.
Oh,
But
really? They've translated that stuff.
I
Okay,
could be wrong. I could be
maybe yeah.
misremembering this,
That
but I
sounds
feel like that is that. But the game itself, yeah, they don't translate. It's just like congratulations. I think the thing that always stood out to me about those is that it just seems like a way to look at something without having to commit to a setup process, right? Um, because like I know you said, I know you said that like um, it's not that hard to set up a PC98 emulation. There's a lot of things you might disagree with me about this, but like you took the time to learn Japanese to play video games to some extent, right?
yeah.
You moved to Japan and stuff. So there's a lot of things to think about your personality that probably leads to you taking actions and overcoming those things, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes when I made a video about a game called Buddy Mission Bond. It's like a Nintendo Switch game by the Otome developer Ruby Party, Angelique, if you really that series.
Okay.
But I played that game using machine translation, and obviously there's issues with that. But to me, I had a great experience. I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad I did that. But like trying to convince someone to overcome that hurdle is like a really hard thing if they have a mental barrier
Yeah.
telling them not to. And I feel like Project Egg is like a good example of like if you just want to play hide line on a whatever you said X1 or whatever, like pay $8,
Yeah.
play some highlight on this weird PC you've never seen in your life, right? And then that will be an interesting experience you have without having to go through the process like, okay, how do I get a BIOS? Technically this is illegal, and depending on who you are, that fear is more real or not, right? And where you live. That's the other thing. I think
Yeah,
that's
I
kind
don't
of the
think
thing.
the BIOS is technically like it's not something anything should be worried about. The BIOS, I don't think NEC is even like really cares that much if you're downloading a copy of their BIOS from their old machine.
I think to
Um,
some people it sounds scary though. I think that is like a real fear people do have, right?
okay,
But
but I'm I acknowledge it's a little bit of commitment to learning,
yeah,
figuring it out for yourself. And I would say, yeah, sure. If you're gonna try to set up a PC98 emulator, then expect to sit down and have to figure it out for maybe the first 5 or 10 minutes at least before you're
yeah.
actually playing a game. And the other weird thing I thought I want to bring up though is when I the one X1 game, the Highlight game I played on Project Egg, I had Project Egg for PC here. Um,
Mhm.
Most of their games are only available on Project Egg for PC. But
Okay,
I
gotcha. Yeah.
actually had a. It actually took me a second to figure out how to get the game to start with even with the Project Egg one. I don't know why. It's like I had to like Google like how do you start a Project Egg game. I think before I managed to like figure out how to start the game. So that's kind of the weird, ironic thing with that. For me, anyway, for that particular example, for maybe for most people, it's probably easier than an emulator. I have never used. There is Project Egg console now. They have for a Switch, right?
Yeah,
Where
that's what I'm
they
looking
have
at right
less
now.
games available. There's like things like Xanadu and a few other games. They might have Highlight now. Maybe not the particular version, weird version of Highlight I needed to get working, but there's much less games available than there are for Project Egg for PC. But
Oh
I
yeah.
wonder if it's a little bit easier. It might be a little easier to get working than Project Egg for PC.
Yeah, my concern because the reason I started looking this up is like I don't know if it's on the English eShop, so that might be its
I think
own
it is, from
app.
what I've heard, it is available in the English eShop, but the games themselves are all untranslated.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So that probably just I mean, when it comes to starting the game though, it's as easy as buying it from the US store, booting it, and I assume you're on the title screen, right? That's a pretty
I guess
short
so.
process, yeah.
I hope I don't, maybe I've never used. I actually had trouble with the PC one, Project Egg.
Maybe it's
I'm
one something we should look at some point.
I I'm of course more accustomed to getting emulators working for all of these old PCs. So when I
Yeah,
need
yeah.
to pull out like an X1 emulator or an FM7 emulator, or even the old Hitachi MT or whatever it's called, something like that, then um, it sometimes it still takes me a second to figure out how to get these. But I'm still more accustomed to like the whole idea of the way these old PC emulators work, where
Yeah.
you got the BIOS and you have the floppy drives and the tape drives and when you're dealing with 80s PCs, you got cassette tapes or another thing you have to deal with. Um, but yeah, even for me, it sometimes takes a second. But I
Yeah.
would still say my overall point is still like don't be too afraid with PC98 emulation. Like if you can't figure something out, then just Google it. Like there's the information is definitely out there, and there are. I think almost all PC98 emulators do have English versions for the emulators you can get. So
Yeah.
all of the menus you can get in English and everything. It's just the games themselves that are going to be in Japanese, most of them, and uh, yes,
Yeah.
my overall point is give it a try. Like if you're afraid to try it, definitely try it before you give up.
I could be like forcing like a point on here, so if this feels unnatural, feel free to let me know. But I do feel like generally like the sentiment you have kind of going into talking about like the CRT stuff and also the emulator stuff is just like don't let the original technology limit you that much, right? Like if you want to play a game, just play a game. I think is like the feeling I'm getting from what when you're like thinking about like CRTs being overrated or anything like that. Is that too far of a reach? I'm just trying to figure out if that feels accurate.
I'd say just play however you. I mean, when it comes down to just play however you want to. I wonder if I don't know if this is the point you were getting at here, but I wonder if there might be some. There's got to be at least some people who think like there may be a newcomer even to retro gaming and they've just heard that like oh you've got to have a CRT and so they
Yeah.
think oh if I want to get into like old collecting old NES games with a real NES then I'm going to need to buy a CRT TV too to play it on and I wonder if there are people like that but I would say definitely for those people first just try it on a regular modern display and see if it looks good enough to you
See
like
you
if
like it in the first place. Yeah.
yeah, and it might be a much I mean, there are some pretty cheap upscalers you can get now that are not that expensive that do a pretty good job of upscaling. Just like even the retro tank is, I know it's a little pricey, but it's probably better, easier than buying a CRT TV nowadays with the prices for some of them and the amount of
Yeah. Yeah.
space you're going to be dealing with. Try an upscaler first and see if that's good. If you like the way that looks, then I'd say definitely just play that way. Like, and I mean, there might be people who will tell you like, "Oh no, you need to play on a CRT. Like, you don't know what you're missing out on and everything." But when it comes down to it, if it looks good to you, I think the main thing it comes down to is like people associate that super sharp look with emulators. When it comes
Yeah.
down to like the 8 and 16-bit systems, people were not used to seeing that super sharp look where you can see all the pixels, and still until we started playing on emulators in the 90s. And we finally got to see like all the pixels and all their pixelated glory. Like with I could always see that there were pixels in 8-bit games. I always knew that the sprites were made of pixels, obviously,
Yeah.
but you can, I mean, it's super obvious on an emulator or any modern, even with real hardware now with an upscaler and modern display, you can see all of it and all of its unmitigated pixelated glory. And some people don't like that, I think, is what it comes down to. They want it to be more blurred around the edges because that's the way it was meant to look. And it isn't just a blurry an issue of blurry versus sharp either. There's certain effects like you mentioned. Sometimes there'll be a certain stage in one game where like the color will look wrong on a modern display, or the waterfall won't look like it's falling right correctly on a modern display. But when it comes down to it, I mean, I'm fine with playing Sonic the Hedgehog on a on a modern display with an upscaler.
Yeah.
I don't care if it looks exactly the same as it's supposed to. But maybe this will resonate with more with people with, for some reason though, with arcade cabinets, with old arcade cabinets from the 90s, early 90s, 80s. I think it's I prefer to have arcade cabinets that still have the original CRT in it. I don't like a lot of people nowadays. There'll be people who will replace a CRT in an arcade cabinet with a modern
Yeah.
LCD display instead as like an upgrade, or just maybe because the old CRT doesn't work anymore or something. But that's lame. I'd rather have when I'm playing on a full arcade cabinet, like that's a full experience. Like it should be as close as possible as the way it was back then. And for some reason, even me, like the flat screen TV guy, I'm the flat screen display guy, maybe I don't really need CRTs. For when it comes to arcade cabinets, for some reason, I've got to have a CRT. So
I
that
think
throws a yeah.
environment is like weirdly important with arcades. So like the feel of an arcade is like a part of the arcade, if that makes sense.
I guess, and I mean, but there's
Yeah.
still people who will buy arcade cabinets now and use them at home now too. So, and obviously,
Mm.
your home probably isn't going to feel like an arcade. You can do, I
True.
mean, you can do your best to make your gaming room downstairs, your basement, feel like an arcade. I'm sure there's lots of people who do, well, who have multiple arcade cabinets who try to duplicate the feel of an actual arcade, but I don't know. It's all depends on how far you want to go with everything, right?
Yeah.
Do you want one authentic arcade cabinet with the CRT on it, or do you want a whole arcade in your basement? It all depends on how much space and how much money and how much effort and trouble you want to go through, right?
Yeah, I think like the thing, yeah, I mean, it sounds like from what you've told me, you've made your own compromises, right? Depending on your life. And so it's all about where you're willing to make these compromises at, right? Because you don't care if you're using an original PC-98 keyboard, right? Where some people apparently that matters, right? Kind of
I
thing.
think it would be,
Uh,
if I had the space though, I guess I would have a PC-98 keyboard if it wasn't a space issue for me. Just maybe when I'm playing myself, it doesn't bother me too much. But the times when I really wish I had an original keyboard was for the purpose of my YouTube channel. When I need to show the keyboard on screen, I feel like it
oh
would be
yeah.
much better to if I could show a real PC-98 keyboard on the screen. Because and another thing is, even just because I don't want to have to re-explain every time I show my keyboard that, oh, I'm using an
Yeah.
adapter. It's like, because I get that question all the time. How are you using a PC-98 with that modern looking keyboard and everything? So people who have followed the channel for a long time know that I use those adapters, but there's always newcomers who will
You should
come and be
make
puzzled by that.
a video about it and then like tag it at the part of the video where you show your keyword every time. So it always
Yeah.
pops up as a card. Like, here's what's going on here. This is a PC-98 keyboard over here.
Oh, you have one.
Yeah, my
Nice.
PC-98's
Have you
over here,
actually
but
tried? Have you used your PC-98 much at this point? Or
No, I don't
No.
know how to use old PCs.
Mm.
That's my big issue. So, like how to navigate
I mean, have you
Japanese
turned it
DOS.
on? What does it do when you turn it on? Like,
Oh, it works.
it works.
So, yes, it
Does
turns
it
on,
boot?
it works. I've played games on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is the big task of setting out the PCFX GA, which doesn't seem like it should be an issue, but I could not get it figured out. Um
Hmm.
but keep in mind, like, the first PC I used was a Windows 95 PC. So going
Yeah,
into
no,
like DOS and things
you
like
should be
that.
right at home though, then shouldn't you? Well,
Well,
then you
DOS
still
is
had a
very
DOS
different.
prompt, but you had a the DOS prompt was still pretty central to
Oh,
Windows
I was a
95,
kid. I
wasn't
wasn't using that. I was
it?
clicking the
Okay, all right.
icon on the desktop to say, "Please launch putt putt." So, right,
Okay,
I'm gonna play the little purple car game. So like I didn't really start
it's from the same era though.
messing.
You can feel that it's from the same era
Yeah,
though.
I didn't really start messing with PCs until like in any reasonable degree, probably till XP, and I didn't start going into things like the regedit and things like
Okay.
that until
Okay.
Windows 7. So
Okay.
yeah,
But yeah. With
I
PC,
could learn it. It's just a
The
time
effects
thing.
GA, I think the weird thing for that is like it's designed to be used completely with the floppy drive. Like you don't
Yeah.
even need a hard drive for the PCFX GA. Is like the weird thing. I recently set up my PCFX GA on my PC 98 not that long ago. When
Oh, right.
I actually needed to capture some PCFX footage. I thought I would just use the PCFX GA, and yeah, I got it working, but there were lots of things I didn't remember accurately about it. Like I thought there was a way to use it with the hard drive instead of, I'm sure it's possible to get it working on the hard drive instead, but the whole official setup process is made around the floppy drive. Like
Oh, that's good to
you
know.
need to make a floppy for your backup memory, and everything is stored on a floppy disk. So
Mhm.
then if you want to back up your saves to the hard drive, you would have to manually copy them over then from the floppy disk.
I remember the big problem I had was getting the CD drive to talk to the GA. I could not get them to look at each other.
Yeah, yeah, that's going to be a
So,
difficult one if you're not. Yeah, if you first of all got to get the CD drive working with the PC 98, right? And there's a number
yeah.
of different CD drivers that have to be in your config.sys and your autoexec.bat in order,
That
and
was
it's
all
got
the
to be
stuff that
set
I
up
was just
right.
confused
If
about. I'm like,
that's
I have no
working,
idea.
if that's working, then you're good to go. So you first have to be able to access your CD drive from the DOS prompt
Yeah. I
before
may
you can get
actually
that
do it
working.
given my PCFX CD drive is dying. Um, I may just need to stomach it. It'd be a good experience to do,
You can
you
get an
know. But
ODE for the PCFX.
there isn't one right now though.
Isn't there one? Or are they working on one, right?
It more or
Somebody
less
is.
got canceled.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so the guy took the money, but I don't know if you knew. So I didn't know him super well, and this is kind of why I didn't want to talk about it too much on the podcast. Was he announced a bunch of ODs at once, and PCFX was one of them, and I was like, I have no idea who this guy is, and his delivery. I know he made a
Just
3DO one,
another
so that's about it.
overpromising Kickstarter.
You know,
Probably.
things happen. That's the thing is like I don't want to sit there
Yeah.
and I didn't want to say it was bad. And like when we talked about it on the show, I want to be very clear with people. I'm not here to say this was like a scam or anything like this. I'm here to say this is what happened and this is what the message that he's sending is. And it's just good for people to know. But I'm
I
not
get
here to like criticize him.
Yeah, I would say
So
people should be very wary of those kind of crowdfunding
yeah,
projects where they promise, especially things where like I've seen a lot of people making retro games where say if we get to a certain point we're going to also release it for the Genesis and we're going to also release
yeah,
it for the TurboGrafx and everything, and like you have to realize when you're releasing it for retro systems you basically have to reprogram the whole game from the ground up. Are they really going to do that
yeah,
if they just get to a certain point? And then same thing with an ODE though. Like I mean that's a complicated thing making that for all of those different systems. Like they
yeah,
were planning to make it for a number of different systems, right?
yeah. I
So
think it was
and
the
then just piece
CDI and some other stuff. I forget what
and
it
then
was,
also
but
the PCFX. Yeah,
yeah,
if it wasn't specifically for the PCFX, I guess there would probably some reason to be wary there. But it was
yeah,
good. It's good to be. Sounded hopeful though. I hope
yeah.
somebody gets one working eventually. Sorry, I didn't mean to open that can of worms there with the ODE. I thought that there were. that they were working on, and there was something done or almost done by now, but wasn't up to date on that issue.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't like I said, I don't personally know him. I don't wanna blame him, but I don't know him, so I
Yeah.
don't wanna
Yeah,
say
same
anything
here.
really.
I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I'm sure he had the best intentions when he
Yeah,
first
sure.
announced it.
I
I'm
don't think
sure.
you do stuff like this without being genuinely interested in old tech, personally. Could be wrong, but I feel like if you're making ODEs for old consoles, this is probably not a get rich quick scheme kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, you just got to get their PCFX GA working eventually, as long as you still have a working CD-ROM drive on your PC98 anyway, because that can also be an issue. Those also break eventually at some
so
some
the
point.
person I got the PC98 from gave me a modern drive that works with it.
Oh,
Apparently,
okay, yeah.
I
If you
was
have
told
certain
that.
models, you
So
can use a modern CD-ROM
yeah,
drive, which
it's
you
a
can't on mine. So that's nice to have. With mine, you need to do a complicated mod if you want to use a modern CD-ROM
yeah.
drive on it. So I had to go through a lot of trouble actually to get a working CD-ROM drive on mine. I had one for a while that was kind of working, and now the one I have is a lot better, but it still has some minor. It has sound issues for the CD audio, but other than that, it works almost perfectly.
I need a better sound card for
The other
actual
thing is,
PC games.
yeah, my CD-ROM drive actually doesn't read CDRs very well, and either, so I
Oh.
mostly have to have real real CD-ROMs for it.
I
Um,
have a BX3 is the model I have. I don't know if
BX3.
that
I'm really
rings out
not
to you,
familiar.
but
It's one of the newer 9801 models, right? So
yeah,
with the
98.1,
CD-ROM
I think
drive,
like,
it's not a 9821. Right?
I think it's like a 1992,
Early 90s.
93
Yeah,
kinda
I
system,
think
so
somewhere around there. I was already in the 9821 days, but they were still releasing some 9801 models.
yeah, yeah, so but, I think the PCFX will be the thing I mainly use it for once I get it up and running again here,
You'll
so
get it working. I can probably help a little bit with that, but
I appreciate yeah, it's one of those things that, like, I don't wanna say that, like, I can't figure it out, I think it's just I haven't given it the time.
yeah, it's
I
one you just need time to sit down. Like with a PC98 emulator, you have to expect it's gonna. But
yeah.
for fairness, a PC98 emulator is way easier than what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I've done because like I think I got this probably at the tail end of me just buying stuff because it's interesting and weird. I say that, but I got a Sega Bina recently, and that's its own weird, interesting thing. It's like the Pico 2 or whatever.
Yeah,
So
I've
and
seen one of
that
those.
barely works. But I think kind of after I got this, I realized it's like I probably should just focus on PCFX when it comes to weird old Japanese systems because even now I don't dedicate enough time to the PCFX in my opinion. So like getting even like a Sega Saturn, I kind of feel like I'll let other people handle that. So
Yeah,
like I can do my weird PCFX thing and let other people look at all that other stuff.
yeah, it's
So
good to have focus, I think,
yeah,
because there's already so much you can do with the PCFX alone that there. I
yeah,
mean, you could talk about it. And there's plenty of games to talk about for it.
yeah,
I'm trying to do the same thing with PC98 and 88 now, but I still get a lot of people asking me to talk about other games for other systems because they want to hear my opinion on. They like my presentation style, I guess, and they want to see me do that with other Japanese games for other
yeah.
systems too. And I've humored some from patrons when they get to the request when they can make an official request if it's something I can do within reason that's not for PC98 or PC88. I will do it if I feel up to it, which I've done. I did Langrisser for PC for the Mega Drive, Sega Mega
Oh,
Drive,
nice.
not too long ago, and
Filler was trying to get me to play Langrisser, and I kept denying him.
for
I feel so
PCFX.
bad. Yeah. I was like, "I just wanna play other things that are not Langrisser." So we're playing
Yeah,
Kachio-kun
I
right now
understand. It was
instead.
really time consuming. I was surprised, like playing Langrisser again for the first time in a long time. Like the game is really time consuming, and I think also with the PCFX one, yeah, it takes
Yeah.
so long to clear one stage. So you're talking about a big commitment in time that a lot of people just don't have to
Yeah.
dedicate to that.
Um, just as a heads up, so like in my head, I've kind of reached the end of the podcast, so I was going to stop the recording. Do you feel comfortable with that, or is there more that you felt like you wanted to say?
Have we gotten all to the point? Have we gotten to all the points I wanted to make? I'm trying to think here. I guess so. Yeah, I did finally make the point that with arcade cabinets, I usually prefer CRT
Yeah. It's a
and
tough topic. I will say that you're talking about a very ephemeral thing of like what people enjoy about that stuff. So I think I'm like it's a little challenging to like conclude on something, I feel like.
yeah,
But yeah.
I think maybe I probably already said everything, but just to wrap it up, I would just say when it comes down to it, play whatever you like. And
Yeah.
I totally understand there's lots of advantages to CRTs. There's lots of reasons to play old games on CRTs. Even PC 98, it's not. I think for PC 98, it's it's less of an issue than it is with consoles because you're dealing with monitors that are
Yeah.
instead of TVs. And uh, when it comes down to it, I mean, it's just whatever you like. With consoles, there's a pretty good argument, but I think also there are lots of really good upscalers now that make playing retro consoles on a modern display also a totally valid choice if that's what you
Yeah.
want to do. I was just gonna the one thing I didn't say is like I remember the time I bought my first flat screen TV in 2006, and
Mhm.
it was a crappy by today's standard. It was a very small 720p TV. It did 1080i and 720p, and just when I brought that home for me, it was like it was Christmas. No, it was like this is what I dreamed of. Like
Yeah.
and like I just always growing up, like CRT was just what we had. And by like the late 90s, sometimes when I was playing console games, there were lots of times I found myself thinking like, is this the best we can do? Like, I mean, technically LCDs existed by then, and I always look at the TVs and the whole like CRTs, like everything could they could easily get misshapen or like have lots of overscan or imperfections. And I know people will say then, oh, you just need to get a better CRT. Then they would say, don't use those old crappy ones. But we had a lot of crappy ones back then. And even on the good ones, I always remember thinking like things like can look very blurred together and I always kind of always thought I imagined something similar to what we have now, where the pixels are more clearly defined and
Yeah.
and resolution. Like each pixel is supposed to be a particular thing and everything. So now really, I mean, I would say in some ways I'm living the dream. Like I always for me still, I live in the 90s. So for me, like like I said earlier, a CRT is still like the default. Like that's still in my mind like a TV is a CRT. And like now
Yeah.
we have these future displays that we watch things on, which are weird and but very cool, and they're very. And I think overall, there's a reason why we don't use CRTs besides just the inconvenience and how big they are. Because overall, even though their CRT does have certain advantages, the modern flat screen displays we use are clearly superior technology for multiple reasons, and
Yeah.
so you do get a lot of advantages. I think even playing retro consoles on a modern display, there's still a lot of reasons to prefer that. I think too. So it's all up to what you want.
Yeah.
It's all up to what you want to do. And if CRT is the thing for you, then cool. I'm just totally, for some reason, the first time I got my flat screen display, of course, I upgraded to much higher resolution ones later than that 720 one I had, but I just loved my flat screen display so much when I first got it. Just watching even just broadcast TV in Japan in HD for the first time, 720 HD, which is not really HD by most people's standards, but uh, I was hooked from the beginning. So maybe I'm weird. I mean, I love old school 90s technology, but when it comes to monitors, I'm just a flat screen guy when it comes down to it. It's my thing for some reason.
I
Okay,
mean,
so
in some ways, like with you saying you lived in the '90s, it kind of feels like you still have the excitement for flat screens from the
I
90s
still
as
do.
well.
I still look at flat screens. Even today, like 1080p ones or whatever. I still it looks so good. Like when 4K first came out, it was like, why do we need 4K? It already looks so good. 1080p is perfect. Why would you ever want something better? HDR? Well, we don't need that. I mean, the human eye can't even
The
tell
black
the
levels.
difference. Yeah, the
Look how
black
dark it
levels.
gets.
Yeah, it all depends like how far you want to go with all these things. It's all
Yeah.
like how far you want to take it, what you're willing to deal with. If you're gonna always be, I don't know, keeping up with the Joneses and saying, oh, that they have a better looking screen than I do, or like I'm not enjoying the maximum black levels here or something, then you can always be dissatisfied. There's always something to be dissatisfied with if you want to, or you can just
Yeah.
choose to be satisfied with what you have, and that's what I would recommend. It's much
Yeah.
more happy.
I think something that's like really interesting at the end there was this almost nostalgia for the LCD screen in some ways. I like almost like a, hey, this is the future of display technologies. In a lot of ways, the general form factor of an LCD, of a HD TV, is largely the same. And I think like for normal people, when they look at these things, you would say most of these devices are similar. Obviously, if you're into actual display technology, things are very different, and in terms of a lot of different things like refresh rates, HDR, resolution, all that stuff, right? There's a lot of different things of how monitor technologies have evolved. But I think it's like, it is fascinating that like in some way, despite like being a retro game enthusiast first and foremost, like it feels like that enamoring of like the LCD kind of still wins out overall. I think there's a lot of like interesting things that has happened in the industry that has kind of like reinforced some of these things too, right? I think most modern indie games don't go for a CRT look, right? They go for the emulation pixel perfect look, right? And in a lot of ways, it is kind of like, in some ways, seeing this like weird raw version of a game that, maybe was never really intended to be seen that way, at least on console, right? But it's like something that like appeals to most modern sensibilities, right? I think in a lot of ways, these games were developed for a different technology, but thrive on LCDs and things like that, using the right technology, obviously. You need upscalers. Your composite cables directed to an LCD screen. I'm not going to tell you how to play your video games. The key message in all of this was play however you want, right? If you're going to do yellow, white, red Nintendo 64 into your 4K HDR TV that has like a ton of processing on it, go for it. I'm just saying. But, I just think it's interesting that like this modern technology, in some ways, while it transforms this art depending on how much you care about that, it in some ways I think enhances it for people like Mr. Jakes. And obviously PC is a little bit of a different space. PC, I think he mentioned in the show, also has like a very like high resolution kind of thing. So, but yeah, key thing, focus on what you want, right? Focus on what's important to you. And I think that's like something I don't think I talked about on the show, but like something that's really important to me when I talk about video games is I think the experience of playing a video game is kind of number one. And the hardware is a part of that. But I have to really ask myself, what role does hardware play in this, right? And that's going to be different depending on the type of game it is. If we're doing like a card game on the DS where you're scanning cards in, I think there is a role that physical cards can play. I'm not saying that 100% guaranteed, but like off the top of my head, that's what I think. So anyways, thank you so much to Mr. Jake's coming. Go check out Mr. Jake's channel for PC98 stuff. He is on it. He is rolling. So I love the commitment he has. It is something that I should strive to do, I think, and something I've been slowly trying to get myself towards with the PCFX. Of just like, there's all these games on the PCFX I really be playing, and they like overlap with a lot of my interests. So I'm trying to shuffle more of that focus over there with me right now. But yeah. Go check out Mr. Jake's stuff. He's doing awesome work. I'm guessing if you're listening, there's a very good chance you came from Mr. Jake's channel. So thank you for coming over here and listening to the show. So yeah, I appreciate it. And I'll have links to, his channel and the Basement Brothers social media and all that stuff down in the description. So thanks again for listening. And we'll be back the first Monday of next month. with a new guest, which I actually haven't scheduled yet. I'll get there. I'll schedule someone soon.